There's a red light, folks. Friday afternoon, downtown Honolulu at the ThinkTech Hawaii studios. Ted Ralston, your host on Where the Road Leads, the show that has no limits to where it goes to get people to be on this show, Jay Fidell. Jay's sitting next to me here.
What's the comment with the red light, Ted?
Everywhere
suggesting we have red lights here?
Everything else in the world, when you want to go, it goes green, right? Or maybe blue on your modem or something like that. Only in the video business does red mean go.
Hawaii going red.
And I'm sure that a green light in the studio here means stop, right?
Probably.
That would be correct, right? So I'm just always intrigued by that, and I have to readjust my thinking coming from automobiles and airplanes
out
into
of the
studio. Yeah. So anyway, we're going to talk today about where the road leads in terms of it leading to a new element in Hawaii's future. That's being the world of UASs, UAVs, and the great unfolding and unleashing of capability that is right around the corner. We've spoken here a month ago on this show that the FAA has finally released the long-awaited guidance for the what's called a notice of proposed rulemaking, which will generate the rules that will allow these kind of UASs to be certified and to be operated by commercial businesses to actually engage in profit-making business as well as university research. We're halfway through that rulemaking comment period.
We saw the rules.
Got the rules.
The draft rules.
It's fantastic. There's a draft rule, which is, and only 190 pages of explanation of how the rules came into being. There's a presidential document, an order to all the federal agencies that accompanies that. We'll chat about that in a minute. And then we, the public, all of us.
But what about you? You're an expert. Did you look at it? What do you think? Is it any good? Are they smart rules or are they not smart rules?
They caught us all by surprise.
Why you say? They're smarter than you thought.
They're totally smarter than we thought. Right? Yeah. FAA is great.
You know, let me throw one in on you. You know, it was just within the last.
Don't forget we have Chuck Devaney on the line up in Montana.
Well, why don't you introduce him? Okay.
I'll do that. Okay. Just again, the show that's known by the company it keeps, and Chuck Devaney, who's been on this show a few times here in the studio, is actually at our Midwest, Upper Midwest studio right now in Billings, Montana, or someplace like that.
There are no red lights there yet.
Well, you don't know. And anyway, Chuck is in mid-career in this exact business, UASs. Chuck, welcome aboard again.
Hey, Ted. Hey, Jay.
Hi.
So how's the weather up in Montana?
71 degrees today, which is a huge difference from the type of weather that we've had.
So it's a great day to go outside and fly UAVs.
It was a great day, except I spent most of my day inside today showing the local agriculturalists the current innovations in our new technology.
That's pretty cool. The word innovation is what is going to be shot through this whole UAS business. Not just the vehicles themselves, but the software analytics that come with it. And that's where Chuck is kind of I would say Chuck is one of the really the world's go-to guys on how to think together about the vehicle, its operation, and the analysis of the information coming from it. I realize that's too much for you.
Someday, Chuck, you're going to be amazingly wealthy and powerful, and the only question is whether you continue to talk to Ted and me.
And we have a job for you here at the station. You know what the pay is. So when you're looking to really supplement your income.
I have to add that there would in no way be any reason for me to be sitting here if it wasn't for that man, Ted Ralston, right there.
Well, thank you very much, Chuck.
Well, I have to throw my thing in now. It sounds like a good time.
Okay.
You know, within the last week, there were drones flying in Paris, right? Wasn't it over Paris, over public buildings, government buildings? And there was a big uproar about that, and they couldn't find out who was flying the drones. They thought it might be bad people flying the drones. You know, they wanted to stop the drones, but I don't know if they ever did stop the drones. And so we have a whole new issue raised about people, you know, setting drones off in a city to fly over government buildings and threaten them in some way.
Or land on the White House lawn and things like that.
Same thing, without any way really of knowing who put the thing up there in the first place. You know, they might have got it at Sharper Image. Are they still in business?
Who knows? Yeah.
And, you know, and it becomes completely fungible, you know, and a commodity and anonymous. You could take something out of a dime store and send it up there, and no one would know who you were, even though you were sending photos back or what have you. And I think this whole question of anonymity, is going to become important.
Well, that's a really interesting observation you bring up, and along with the FAA rulemaking that came out, there's a presidential declaration that talks about how all the federal agencies are going to work together to resolve that problem. But it's a behavior issue. We've got to find a way to get the good out of these systems without letting the bad aspects or the adverse aspects come forward. We have an example of that right here in Honolulu very shortly. There's a festival that typically takes place at Ala Moana at night, and there's concern about drones invading that again, and so we've begun to talk about how we're going to police that. But really, it's up to it's the behavior and the values of the people who use these. I think we'll find people like Chuck and hopefully myself and others who are using these for good. We have to find a way to clean out and police those things that are being done in an adverse way.
I don't think we have that yet.
The rules are all the rules of privacy and privacy invasion and harassment. Those are on the table. They're not an issue. The issue is discovering and enforcing.
Right.
And like everything else, when you introduce something new in the system that can be abused, it's going to get abused. And then with this, the enforcement system will adjust, and we'll be able to manage this in some way. I mean, there's no different than cars or guns or anything like that.
One more piece of complexity. When drones were being used, well, first becoming public, I guess, in, I want to say Afghanistan, but it could have been Iraq, we were embarrassed. The country was embarrassed because somebody figured out a way to interfere with the radio signals with this really cheap device you could buy in a hardware store. They could interfere with the radio signals and either misdirect the drone or misdirect the stream of information coming back from the drone. And I suggest to you that not only do we have anonymous drones up there, but we have drones that can be misdirected by bad guys.
Absolutely.
So the possibilities of bad guys, making bad use of this whole technology is out there, and I think something we ought to watch because it's not going to stop right away.
And part of that's been discussed at this very table with John Mullen in San Francisco and General Wong here. That's the whole issue of cyber. These drones, like it or not, are part of a communication system. They're part of a command and control structure. They're part of a distributed, accessible environment, and they can be penetrated. They can be spoofed, they can be jammed, they can be redirected. And that's the piece that number 3 out of 4 items that the FAA is very concerned about once we get past the very initial stages. Let's talk about that whole issue of the rulemaking, those threats, and what the president's doing about it in the second segment here. But let's get back to Chuck Devaney here a little bit. Chuck is a never-ending fountain of brilliance and great ideas. And as I said, he's become really one of the national turn-to guys, arguably, to come and work the problem, whether it's the image analysis, whether it's building up the drone itself or operating it. And he's got experience in the Philippines now and in Canada, in all over the U.S. And Hawaii, of course, is his home. And there's no reason that the kind of thought process leadership he's got going couldn't be used to generate business opportunities here in Hawaii. So Chuck, without putting too much pressure on you or setting expectations too high, give us a sort of a briefing on what all you've been involved in lately and where this might all go.
Okay, so, obviously I left Hawaii to explore an endeavor in humanitarian assistance and disaster response, which has not entirely dissolved. However, I've been forced to pivot into other opportunities. In doing that, I have become a part of a company called Ready to Drone, which is a subsidiary of Conservation Drones, which you might be somewhat familiar with. So right now we are looking to empower other municipalities, predominantly in foreign governments, not so much within United States airspace, to use this technology to help in anti-poaching endeavors, also environmental management issues, natural resources, and predominantly disaster prevention type stuff. So we have put together a curriculum where we, in 4 to 5 days, can teach and instruct people how to operate these aircraft safely and reliably, and also give them a little bit of insight in how to interpret the information as well. So you get, 1,000 images, say, in one shot. So what do you do with that? Well, you have to make that into some sort of interpretable imagery. So it all comes together in one mosaic, and then we can enlighten them on the type of information that they can actually derive from that. And it's been very, very successful. However, we don't see a lot of that opportunity within the United States because we aren't entirely certain on how to navigate the FAA regulations or lack thereof.
Well,
And
can you go out right now in Montana and fly a drone? You alluded to that earlier, Chuck. Can you decide you want to fly a drone there in the hinterland of Montana? Can you just let one fly? What are the limitations that you're bound by when you're out there testing and teaching?
That is a really great question, Jay, and thank you for that. Here in Montana, most of the farms are thousands of acres huge. I mean, they're gigantic. One farmer could have 1,000-acre plot in one area and a several thousand-acre plot in another area, predominantly pasture for their cattle or dryland farming. So right now, my understanding, the FAA doesn't really have a whole lot of regulation for the individual farmer. So I can go out and I can fly a demonstration for an individual farmer on their own private plot. Or I can go out and just practice, for instance. And, this plot could be 20,000 acres and I could be in the middle of it. So I'll go out there for that individual farmer and just, demonstrate for them, what the possibilities are.
Let me take a piece at that, crack at that as well, Jay. Again, the FAA has issued the notice of proposed rulemaking, but part of the FAA's congressional authorization requires it to provide waivers to farmers. Farmers, movie sets, infrastructure inspection people like flare stacks and power grids, law enforcement, and if I was younger, I could remember the fifth one. I'll remember that during the break. But anyway, there's called a 333 exemption. There's like 500 have been applied for, about, I think, 50 been issued. And farmers, as Chuck is saying, can go beyond the demo phase. They can actually use drones for the benefit of their own farming operation.
Even before the rules are finalized?
Yeah, absolutely, yeah.
That's pretty
Yep,
good.
it's called a bridge rule. 333 is a bridge rule that allows them to operate today because of the value to the food security and the food chain. And as the rules materialize, they'll incorporate some of the thought process of the 333. So you could actually do that as a commercial business today, and it is being done. In fact, this bird on the table here, and folks have seen this guy here at the table before, and Chuck has seen it in flight. This is one of many that have actually been certified through that 333 process. This particular unit is made by Trimble, who makes a lot of the surveying equipment. And they've picked this line up from Belgium operation, and they've got it certified. So there are farmers out using these exact systems. They get cameras that go on the puka here in the bottom. You show the good people on TV the hole that the camera looks out at, and does the mapping, and then as Chuck says, does the vegetation stress analysis, or does the growth rate and other watering situations, land mass issues, all the things that farmers need to really understand analytically.
When you say certified, certified for what?
Certified for use by farmers
By the FAA?
By the FAA, yeah.
So I can't build my own?
You can, and you could actually get your own certified as well. But it's just a process you have to go through.
Can I fly one that's not certified?
Sure, you can. We'll talk about that after we get back from our break. But yes, you can come out with us to the Kawainui Model Airfield and fly all day long. We can pry you loose from the station here. We'll talk about that when we get back from our first break. See you in about 30 seconds, folks.
Aloha, I'm Kili'i Akina, president of the Grassroot Institute and host on Ehana Kako, a weekly program on the ThinkTech Hawaii broadcast network. Ehana Kako means let's work together. Think of the sad alternative, let's not work together. Here in Hawaii, with all of our diversity and the richness of the people, it's important for us to come together around issues on the basis of what's right, and what's good, and what's going to serve the common good. And that's what we try to do at Ehana Kako. Every week, we interview movers and shakers, people in government, business, and other sectors of society to talk about how to create together a better government, economy, a better world here in Hawaii that can bless the rest of the world. I thank you for your attention to ThinkTech Hawaii, and we look forward to seeing you every Monday, 2 to 3 p.m. on the ThinkTech Hawaii Broadcast Network. We're Ehana Kako, and we wish you well. Aloha.
One, here we are. Welcome back, everybody. Ted Ralston here, your host at Where the Road Leads. Our fantastic guest, Chuck Devaney in Montana, standing by, and Jay Fidell here in the studio in Honolulu. We're talking about where the road leads, in this case, the road leading to a new element in Hawaii's future, and that is unmanned air systems, or UASs, sometimes called UAVs. Used to be called drones. Mm-hmm. We don't try to use that word if we can avoid it, although it just rolls off your tongue quite easily. There's so much we could talk about here. We could never possibly get the whole waterfront covered in this one 45-minute segment. But Jay, you had some interesting questions we were discussing over break. Why don't you put them out here?
Two things, not necessarily in order of importance, but if we're going to have all these drones out there, and it sounds like under 333 we'll have a lot more, in a few months than we do now when they rule on those 500 applications. So I'm going to make sure they don't hit each other, because that would be bad. Be bad for the whole initiative. So that means that somebody, maybe like Chuck, I don't know if Chuck's doing this, but somebody has to be coding the programs that will, use the sensors to avoid collisions. Now I know, and we've talked about this before, there are technologies like that now, but it seems to me that the more drones you have in the air, the better those technologies have got to be, and somebody maybe like Chuck is going to make a lot of money.
Well, we certainly hope Chuck makes a lot of money.
And we still want him to say hello to us in the street at the same time.
I knew you when, right?
Yeah, I knew you when. But somebody is going to have to figure out how to do this, and I doubt that it's perfected just yet. What do you think, Chuck?
Well, the whole sensor to void thing has been, something that's been worked on, I think, at least for the last couple of years. And, the question is, as a drone travels, especially a long, course or a long waypoint mission, it has to be handed off from one network to another. In terms of coding, I really can't help you out in terms of exactly what that looks like, but the infrastructure has to already be in place. So they're looking at different cellular networks, from what I understand. One of which I think is the Cellular One network is an actual, communication infrastructure that will actually have the ability to be able to pass off that vehicle from one station to the next. And as far as I know, that's as far as it's gone. Is it Texas A&M that is in the leading edge, I think, of that technology, or at least they've been kind of given the funding and the go-to
one good value of this program is we can get to express what's going on in the world of this development like once every 6 weeks or so, because it's moving pretty fast. Let me throw another different answer on the table. The way the FAA is approaching this, they're doing it like a crawl, walk, run approach. So the crawl approach is this current national proposed rulemaking, which has separation as the criteria, under 500 feet, and aircraft don't fly under 500 feet. So the UAVs get the below 500, airplanes get above 500, except near an airport where runways happen to be under 500 feet. So separation is the whole idea. Line of sight is you got to keep the thing within line of sight, which means if you see some other airplane or bird or something flying around, you divert and obey the rules of passing on the right. So separation, giving way, passing on the right, and keeping what they call well clear. Keep well clear of such and such, or well clear of the other guy. And see and avoid is now sort of moving into the world of detect and avoid. Since seeing isn't the issue anymore, the eyes are on the ground, they're not in the airplane, we got to detect rather than see. So the crawl component is to keep the airspace separate that the UAV will be in. The next step beyond that might be an assigned airway for a UAV. You can get online and dial up whatever the waypoints are you want, so get your snake course through the sky and fly that. But everybody else knows that you're there and during a time period and not to go there. So again, it's a concept of separation. The detect component has potential ground-based pieces, it has potential onboard pieces. Nobody has the answer to that yet, what detect and avoid is going to be all about. But you're right. once the sky gets blackened with UAVs, some means has to occur that they can detect each other, re-optimize the flight plan to avoid the impact and so forth. I will say, if I can add one last piece to that, even some of the low-end consumer systems are coming out now with software that has what's called geofencing in it. You know that there's 433 airports in the US and you can't fly these things near an airport. So the flight control system in these now has, they all have GPS on them. They're coded to know exactly what the perimeter around the airport is. You can't start them. They won't fly inside that perimeter. And you can't, it's nothing physical. You can't see that.
They're reading a radio signal or
GPS.
something.
Reading the GPS, computing the
Per
position.
location.
Per location.
And so it's programmed in that if you're in this location, you're not going to start.
Right, or if you try to fly into that location, it'll turn back at the interface.
Okay, so that's programmed in the individual drone.
Right.
And that means that if a bad guy comes around, he can unprogram that.
That's the problem, right? So the cyber issue and how you can keep from being spoofed. Not only the cyber issue from spoofing, but also what spectrum we're going to use. These things are all using 2.4 megahertz right now, which is used by a lot of commercial grade garage door openers and things like that. And as the number of UAVs proliferates, there's going to have to be some means of having an assigned frequency spectrum that is useful and is safe. So once again, you know, we've talked about cyber at this table before. These are really a component of the cyber network.
Let me put this question to Chuck. You know, this is like energy. There's distributed and there's centralized. And what I heard Chuck say a minute ago was that it would feed back to a central point, and the central, if you want to call it a drone tower kind of thing, would know where all the drones are. And then building what you said a minute ago, Ted, that conceivably that central point could allow a flight path for that drone and say, you can go from point A to point B and we're going to let you do that, and you can't, you know, you can't vary that course. So in that case, you would have a computer in that tower, in the drone tower, controlling where all the drones were going. And every drone would have to be in touch with the tower. And I suppose you can enforce that by saying, if the drone is not in touch with the tower, if the drone chooses to operate on its own, then the drone, you know, will have to come back to Earth. We're not going to let it fly without being tethered to the tower. That's one way. The other way, and maybe as a combination, the other way is they can sense the other drone. That every drone has an identifier, and it sends out a beacon, what have you. I'm sure this can be abused. And then, you know, every drone can sense how close it is and make sure to, you know, avoid collision that way. I suppose you could have them both working at the same time. But the question I put to Chuck is, so which one would you favor? Which one do you think will prevail? Are you aware of efforts made in one and not the other, or vice versa?
Only I only know of them knowing of each other in an extremely controlled environment. You might see something where you see drones flying in formation and being able to fly a figure eight and then do flips and then do all of these different formations and such. That's an extremely controlled environment where I believe they have some sort of situation where both is working in tandem. You have to be able to account for wind conditions. These things get blown off course. I mean, if you've got a darkened sky or a bane of drones where you've got a very minimal amount of space for them to be able to fly and operate, they've got to have some sort of like identifier, like you say, where they can, you know, be able to bounce some sort of signal where they can avoid each other so they don't collide. But in the interim, there's got to be some sort of tower network, whether it be cellular, where they can pass off from one to the next, to where, you know, they can be able to at least monitor the behavior and the location of these things while they're in the air.
You know, I don't know what's in the FAA rules, but it seems to me, if I were the FAA, and, you know, I mean, it's, someday maybe I will be the FAA, but if I were the FAA, I would not permit a whole lot of drone activity in close proximity without having this system under control.
Well, that again, the crawl, walk, run approach says, okay, we'll enforce that by requiring line of sight, where the operator has to be, the ground-based pilot has to be in visual contact with his UAV at all times, part one. Part two, he has to give way and remain well clear of any other thing flying through the sky, so that you keep separation again, even under a failure condition. And that's the starting point,
But
at
you know,
500
Ted,
feet. So,
that can't last long.
well, that's right. That's
Because
not.
your line of sight, you know, as you said a minute ago, it's fast-moving technology. So right now, I suppose if we went down to the swamp, what is it?
Kauai Nui?
Kauai Nui Swamp, we would have a line of sight. We would see where the drones are, as we did when I went with you. But the reality is these things have greater range every day. The military ones have, you know, far greater than line of sight type of range. And maybe they, you know, they can see with cameras, they can see with sensors, they can see with radar, who knows what. But it'll be way beyond line of sight. And and that whole concept of line of sight has got to go away within months or a year, maybe.
You must be reading the tea leaves, Jay, because that's exactly what the FAA has concluded, that the problem with the line of sight restriction is it's not an economically good solution. It'll drive design for the next 5 or 10 years, but it's not a lasting economic solution. For example, if you're doing damage assessment on a building and you're standing a quarter-mile away or so and you scan the front of the building, where you can see where the UAV is, now you want to go scan the back of the building, the other side of it, to see what the damage looks like.
Can't see it
Can't
anymore.
do it.
Yeah.
Right. So you have to actually physically relocate yourself to the other side of the building and then do it that way. That's just not.
There's also a million possibilities where you don't want to be near the thing for one reason or another. Where, you know, you'll go to, you know, the west side of town. When you want to see the east side of town, you'll set it in motion, it'll cross town. You won't be able to see it, but maybe you'll have radio, television or something, but you won't be able to physically see it. So I mean, I think that's the baby steps we're talking about. Soon enough, that won't be relevant.
Well, the baby steps also include other limitations we should just mention so everybody hears them clearly, but 100 miles per hour, which is like 87 knots, is the maximum speed. Now, we don't know what that means. Does that mean design speed, or does that mean maximum speed in a full power dive with, you know, under a failure condition? Exactly what does that mean? We don't know yet. 500 feet maximum altitude. So it's a highly constrained operation initially. No operation at night, and operation within different proximities to the airport have to have, of course, full cognizance of the air traffic control and the tower and such, so you have to be coordinated with them. So there's a lot of protections in there initially.
So 500 feet, you can probably hear it at 500 feet, huh?
Depends, no, it depends. Most of them at 500 feet, you probably can't hear.
Okay. If you're right up at the ceiling of it, yeah.
Yeah, even at a couple hundred feet, you can't really hear. The power is pretty low on these. But to the point, the end state of this is, the ideal end state is an integrated operation between UAVs and manned aircraft operating together. And that requires the 4 basic R&D themes that are out there that are unresolved at this point. Number 1 is the certification methods by which these complex issues can be certified and failures can be accommodated, where everybody is, we can't allow the air traffic system to get any, we can't degrade the safety in the air traffic system today. We got to be able to retain that. So certification when we get into beyond line of sight is an issue.
Do you think this is dangerous to a 747?
This is, no, I don't personally think this is an example of pretty much the smallest you'll see. This is a 4.5-pound fully loaded system. Turkey vultures weigh 4.5 pounds.
If this got into a turbine in a 747, it would fly into atoms, right?
The foam wouldn't last long.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah.
The fan, so it's doesn't have much of a lethal threat to it. Now, the rule allows aircraft or UAVs up to 55 pounds, 10 times the size of this one. Now, a 55-pound UAV going into a 747 engine is going to be a different story.
Yeah.
And so, in fact, a 55-pound gizmo flying at 100 miles per hour, that's a fairly substantial amount of kinetic energy. So again, it's a crawl, walk, run, test the water, see how it works. The next stages beyond that require this R&D, certification. Requires R&D in the detect and avoid that we were speaking of before, and you were bringing up ground control versus onboard sense and such. So there's a whole world of detect and avoid. And for those in engineering out there, this is a career, and there's no reason these careers couldn't be done here in Hawaii.
I'm wondering about Chuck. I mean, Chuck, are you working on this stuff at all? When you
No,
have
that's-
multiple drones going on?
We've done stuff where we've got 2 drones working off 1 computer, 2 different sets of telemetry with 2 separate mission planners, but there's nothing else going on. We worked in, relatively close proximity to airports in the Philippines, but nothing like what we're talking about now, where we've got multiple aircraft in the air, multiple unmanned aircraft in the air of multiple different scales. I've never seen anything like that before where I've even had to have any concern for it, but I definitely see a concern for it in the future.
Are you working over 500 feet?
Don't answer
You
that.
don't have to answer that
Don't have to
question.
answer that, Chuck.
Yeah,
what happens to our
no,
connection?
no,
It went-
not at
Yeah,
all.
it went bad, right? Did you
Yeah,
say?
actually 400 feet, Jay, is what I keep doing.
Yeah.
122 meters.
How about
Yeah.
line of sight? Are you operating beyond line of sight?
Of course.
Yeah.
All right. Interesting.
Thank you for the question, Jay. Now let's just end that line of questioning
We'll
right now if
stop
we
right
can by
there.
going to a break.
Okay,
shall
yeah,
we?
we'll have a
Okay,
break
we'll
right
have a
now.
break right now.
This is the perfect time. Thank
Right,
you.
thank you.
Hi, my name is Seymour Kazimirski. I have a show called Seymour's World on ThinkTech Hawaii. Our show is about opening minds and facilitating conversations. To tell you the truth, I have no idea what we're going to be talking about. I have no idea who our guests are going to be, but I guarantee you we're going to have lots and lots of fun. Aloha from Seymour's World.
Hi, my name is Andrew Howard. I'm an astronomer at the Institute for Astronomy at the University of Hawaii up in Manoa. I'd like to tell you about the annual open house that we're having. This year it is on April 6th, 11 to 4 p.m. It's an all ages event, kids, grown-ups, even people in between, everyone is welcome. We have a lot of really fun activities. You get to meet astronomers, look at yourself in an infrared camera, play with Legos, make robots, look at videos. You can even make some of the kids like to make comets out of gravel and snow. Even adults like to do that too. You'll be able to look at the sun with a solar camera safely. It's really a great activity. We do this every year in April, and I hope to see you this year. Thanks.
One. Friday afternoon, once again here, folks, downtown Honolulu, the third section of our show, Where the Road Leads. Ted Ralston, your host here. Chuck Devaney in Montana is in our Midwestern studio, and Jay Fidell here is with me in downtown Honolulu. Where the Road Leads, we're talking about the road leading to a new element in Hawaii's future, and that's UASs, which we've talked about many times on this show before, in panel discussions you've held, Jay, even field exercises. We're getting closer and closer to that future as we sit here, and it's fantastic to be involved and to have you leading us in this Inquisition.
I'll tell you,
but we're not gonna go on the Inquisition line you were on before break.
No, we'll try something else.
Try something else, right?
Something else. I'll tell you, the way government works, and the federal government, what do I say? It's different than it was when we were kids somehow.
I was a kid once.
Yeah, I believe that. I think
Just as the
we're all
Earth was
still
cresting
kids
over, and
today.
just the dinosaurs were
Yes,
roaming around.
Yes. And Chuck hasn't left that yet. He's still young.
Yeah.
But anyway, what I get is this: you have very fast-moving technology. I mean, we are really making some tracks on this, and there are probably people in basements all over the world working on this, and they're going to figure out, not only the physical devices, not only the sensors, but the software to make these things do, stuff that we can't even imagine yet. It's one of those kinds of technologies where you can't even imagine all the things that'll happen, that'll occur to you when you move ahead, say 6 months or a year. It's happening. And then you have the FAA, which took altogether too long to come out with these draft regulations. And in my opinion, it's going to take altogether too long to finalize them. It's moving like molasses against a technology that's moving the speed of light. And by the time we get there, out there on the curve, not too far away, when the lines cross, you're going to find that those regulations are so far behind the curve that, they are meaningless. And I would predict for you guys that, when this gets going and when I can either buy a kit or buy a drone or make a drone out of components that I can buy, I'm going to be able to fly over Paris and nobody will know it's me.
Are you running for office?
Yeah.
And so
Hey, the time is now,
this is
too, Jay. You
fantastic.
can already do that,
We
by
just
the
need a
way.
policeman to control the dialogue on this show. That's what we need. On that account, there's so many things you've opened up in that discussion. First of all, the technology is moving fast, and people like Chuck, myself, others, I am, who's not here today, are part of that and observe that and see it going on. And there's how many people actually doing the work. It's incredible. The FAA figured that out, to its great credit, and it said we can't possibly write regulations against something we don't know about yet and something that's still emerging. So we will make performance requirements out there rather than specific design requirements. Airplanes like we fly in today are based against design requirements called TSOs, Technical Service Orders, which tell you exactly how it has to perform. The FAA has said in the case of UAVs, you must be safe. Now, that puts the onus on industry and academia, I might suggest, and us, to figure out what safe means. How do you measure safe? How do you decide where to put safe? Put it in the motors, put it in the structure, put it in the controls? Where do you put it? How much do you bolt on? How do you know when you have enough? What happens when safe starts to become less safe? So this is putting a tremendous load on industry that industry doesn't really know how to handle. And so that's a great step on the part of the FAA. Is we can't handle it, so we'll just tell you to be safe. You figure out what safe is, and then prove it to us. That's how this has turned around from the past. The other thing is the whole issue of expectations. The discussion you went through dealt with the implied expectations that people have associated with emerging technology. 10 years ago, we read all these fear notes about license plate readers. Well, they're all over the place now, and yet the fear is not materialized. I think I saw a video down about 900 AD, which showed the first guy chipping letters into a stone tablet, and all the graybeards are saying, how's this gonna be? How are we gonna manage all this? You know, this guy's chipping letters here. Now we can make multiple copies of something. And this is a technology we have to be careful of. I think every time there's a new innovation of some kind, fire, I'm sure the graybeards, what are we gonna do about fire?
I agree with you, and that's a salient point. What is likely to happen is the technology itself will avoid the need for regulation.
So
And the technology itself will make them safe, will make them, navigable, will avoid collision. But we haven't heard from Chuck on this.
Let's treat Chuck poorly since he's in Montana and we're here. And let me just throw one more piece on before we bring Chuck back in in our final moments here. The other thing I wanted to mention is that the FAA and the presidential, and the White House have combined forces to make these move forward. Both of them, the FAA and the president, have the obligation to generate economic supremacy here. And so they realize these are part of the economic equation. So in parallel with the FAA rulemaking is a presidential document that says how we are going to handle the legal issues you mentioned. Same issue. How do we protect against a yet undetermined technology that could affect privacy, could affect invasion of privacy, could affect harassment, this sort of thing. And so what the president has directed is each federal agency has to go back and figure out that how is it going to make its own internal doctrine and rules compliant with the existing law on the table. No new laws are needed. We have the Amendment 4 of the Constitution. We have the various paparazzi rules and such. They're not going to change. Now we have technology that makes them more accessible. How are we going to control that technology at the agency level? And on the private sector, the Department of Commerce has been put into play to figure out how to have the private sector become compliant in this area. So both the president and the FAA have realized they can't manage the future. All they can manage is the performance of the people who use the systems in the future and make them adhere to the law. But I just wanted to say that because I wanted to make sure people understood that we have both a technology and a social obligation here, and there are approaches going forward in both. We can't see the future yet, but we can see a path there.
Well, what
Chuck.
about you, Chuck?
Yeah.
Do you think the FAA is the right agency here? The FAA is concerned with safety, like airplanes, but this is not the same thing at all. There are so many other possibilities and issues and technologies involved. Maybe
Yeah.
it should be somebody other than the FAA?
Yeah, exactly. So we have the ASPRS, the American Society for Remote Sensing and Photogrammetry. That is a whole nother ball of wax. So going back to your gray beard comment, actually 2 people on my graduate committee actually have gray beards. And they are making me sort of adhere to these older principles of photogrammetry and remote sensing, which has kind of been a little bit difficult So most of my thesis research has been trying to assess the accuracy and or error of the type of imagery that we are collecting and putting on the market for use in scientific measurements and so on and so forth. So kind of moving away from the actual FAA regulations and safety and reliability, there's a whole nother world in photogrammetry and remote sensing where we are trying to minimize the forward propagation of error. So we are trying to adhere to more older or less contemporary standards of remote sensing with more contemporary means of processing that data. So we have different photogrammetry suites like Pix4D, CMP-MVS and VSFM. We have Agisoft Photoscan, and a few others where it's become more automated in terms of how we are processing the data. But there's not a lot of literature in academia which is addressing the error. We have literature that is addressing the accuracy in terms of the data that we're providing for people, but not so much in error. So aside from what the FAA is trying to regulate in terms of safety and reliability, we have a whole nother world of sort of standards and guidelines that we are trying to adhere to in terms of the data that we are producing for things like sea level rise, what kind of vertical datum we can provide. Is this an answer to more expensive means of producing elevation data like LiDAR or radar, satellite imagery? Now that we have this technology, we can acquire the data at a higher temporal scale, but what does that look like compared to, existing means of collecting data and processing it? So that's opened up a whole nother world of error and of error assessment.
If I can suggest on that, we've had that discussion in here with General Wong just recently about interdependence and the infrastructure and how cyber hooks things together. Same issue that Chuck's talking about here. We've made life complicated. We've made it more complex, more cross-dependent and such. How do we protect it now that we've done that to it? Now, for example, even the global supply chain, we don't have any warehouses here anymore. Everything we depend on the supply chain to get us here. We got 10-day supply of toilet paper and rice. That's about it. So that whole issue of risk management, which is what Chuck is alluding to, is what has to come forth here, not just for UAVs, but for cyber and for basically our infrastructure. And that's something we should do. What we should do, Jay, is get some people who are good at thinking about risk management, which is a relatively new concept at the level of interdependence and interlinked infrastructure, and start having a discussion on that line. John Mullen, who was on...
There's a program in Waikiki within the next month or so on exactly that. Risk management, I guess it's in climate change, all kinds of sustainability issues.
Mm-hmm. That's a good point. And there's also, I might want to point out, a training program that's starting up right down the street here in Honolulu, out of FEMA, and the National Disaster Preparedness Training Center, NDPTC, which you can't remember very well.
I have that in Boston, on the inside of my eyelid, yeah.
And the first beta test of that training class will be on the 23rd of March. Class is full, but there'll be other classes offered beyond there, and Chuck will be part of that, I will be part of that. And Jennifer Davidson, who you've had on this show, will be part of that. So we'll be getting into some of these things as time goes on. But I think the concept of risk management at the interdependent infrastructure is an important subject. We should have, once again, ThinkTech Hawaii take the lead in, Jay, right here in downtown Honolulu. So with that, let me just turn to Chuck and ask for a closing comment. Chuck, what would you like the people who are watching this show to take away from them, or from the show, and think about and maybe communicate with you with ideas or questions?
Okay, I really appreciate how quickly the industry has moved forward, especially in the miniaturization of sensors and whatnot. When I look at the media and I see a lot of people who are able to acquire the multi-rotors and developing videos and all of this great imagery, I just want to stress that we are moving forward in this industry in a safe and reliable manner. We want this to be a sustainable industry. So please stop flying over the nation's capital. Please stop flying over the top of
Over
airports.
Paris.
Over Paris, what happened?
Or over the top of Paris. We know that you can fly a multi-rotor aircraft. They're designed so that you don't have, it's not hard for you to do that. And we really think that you have a bunch of courage, and it's great that you're, providing us with these great images of aircraft that are about to take off, but please consider the entire industry as a whole. We're trying to move this forward in a safe, reliable manner, and also ethical.
Chuck, that's a fantastic point of view, and it's, I really thank you very much for bringing that up to us. Jay, your last comment here before we surrender the station to Zuri once again for the weekend?
Well, I would add this, it's something that we touched on many times tonight, and that is the technology is moving very fast. And this whole, possibility, this whole huge science is driven by the technology, more actually than the FAA, more even than industry right now, because it's all focusing on better every day. And I think it's really important and I don't think people fully understand that. And I think it's really important for you, Ted, and for you, Chuck, and for ThinkTech in general, to follow it closely, right down to who's doing what in what technology. And looking forward on these shows, I suggest we do exactly that. Find out who's doing what, who's advancing the needle on every aspect of the technology around these devices.
And to that point, as you notice, Margie's not here today, and she's dealing with that exact issue at home. We've had 3 different service calls on a piece of our home robotics equipment that has yet, I think, maybe finally come through, and so she's babysitting that right now. But she would agree with that totally. So Jay, I thank you very much, sir, for those fantastic insights and motivations. And Chuck, enjoy the warm weather in Montana. I got your one man. It works beautifully out here in the ocean, and your fins. We'll think about you in Montana. We'll see you on the show when you get back to Hawaii.
All right, aloha.
Aloha. Nice.